I was going to start with you, Julio. How can blockchain be used in transactions of all types between agents of resistance and change, artists, campaigners, journalists, bloggers, human rights defenders, lawyers, whistleblowers, to bring about a more just and safer world?
So in pretty much every single aspect of human life that you can imagine. It even mimics the way that natures and other animals are behaving in a decentralized, organic, and parallel way. So for you to understand what is a specific blockchain and what is the political, humanitarian, social, global applications of it, I think it's clue for you to understand which kind of sectors are they actually disrupting and which are the agents of changes in that sense. So for this, I would remember, or I would try to put out into context how are BitNation, how is Liberland, and how are the New Hampshire activists that founded the Free State Project in New Hampshire in the United States. Those are the three biggest organizations worldwide that have the largest amount of software developers and libertarians that use political technology to try to change social activity within a social or humanitarian part of it.
And have you got any concrete examples of how it's currently working to achieve that?
Sure. Can someone put them in here? Second page. David, how are you doing? I'm doing fine, thank you. The next one. Yeah. So as we mentioned before, we have four ideas, four liberating technologies that we believe that are going to be the basic ones. It's just been already mentioned about the Estonia e-citizenships. We're going to be mentioning the Bitcoin Visa debit cards that exist. How are decentralized autonomous organizations, meaning that no individual or no group, let's imagine that they incarcerate, they torture, or they do, or they try to dismantle one specific human rights organization within a different model of holacracy, resilience, and decentralization that are used within Ethereum and blockchain applications, you would be able, as a human rights activist, to change the narrative and change the organizational perception of an organization. We also have biometric digital IDs. Can somebody change for the next one? And we have 12 cases in 10 countries where blockchain is affecting the humanitarian, political, or social organizations. We have cases for human rights, for land registering, for democracy, for Ethiopia, for Black Lives Matter, for white supremacy, for different concepts of oppression, of hierarchy, tangible or intangible, that eventually we could go on or we can talk about them in a personal way. But we just want to mention what we believe as a consultancy of e-governance and do-it-yourself governance. What are the main cases across the world, and how are they actually impacting society across the world? So we've analyzed, as we previously said, 12 cases in 10 countries. We have an estimate of 15 countries, 15 nation-states within its federal or local governments that are currently using blockchain technology, basically for land registration, for e-notarization. We have the case of Honduras. In Honduras, for example, it's both in Honduras and in the Republic of Georgia in the Caucasus. We saw in 2008 and 2009 repressive military regimes or a military coup. We saw it in Honduras, the first Latin American country that had it. And what have they done to try to implement blockchain for political solutions within indigenous communities, also in touristic area to protect the tourist organizations? So what we have in Honduras is that they started using Factum. It's a San Antonio, Texas organization that at the same time is using the same technology in Georgia to register the lands and the assets wherever people are trading two different things. So if I have, if I'm going to be selling a building and I'm going to give it to her, she's going to be buying it for me, and I'm going to be receiving some money. Can you take this for a minute? Someone would actually, the drug dealers that at the moment would be Melton, we just made you the Sinaloa cartel and the Zetas in Mexico and Central America, can come, would steal, and would put a gun against the head and against the government to try, when he's the government, to try to change the land registration, and therefore she would keep the money and the building with no legal capacity to modify that. in situations where where there's a Russophilia or Russophobia, whatever ways that you want to define it, as Abkhazia in Georgia, or as South Ossetia, they're starting to implement this land registering by this Texas company to try to eliminate or to suppress, to make it less difficult than an extremely corrupt government, either because it was invaded by the Russians or it was invaded or that the government has strong ties with the criminal organizations, the cartels, to try to create a more living situations within the blockchain. Beautiful. So the main organization, and if you want to get more involved, if you want to know like who specifically the people and how are they actually using it, this is the case that we have in Honduras. This is the case, this is the case that exists in Ghana. They have a river who controls it, which are resources and how we dissolve them. This is the case that we have in Honduras. We have another case in Ukraine. Can you bring democracy to Ukraine? It's impossible. But let's assume that you can actually do something. These are the main organizations where this political motivation is happening. The big one in there is Free State Project. That is a political epicenter where more than 2,000 political software developers are trying to come up with these ideas. It is I.M. Freeman, it's Joel Valenzuela, it is Jeff Tuckery, and it's everyone that comes from this libertarian perspective, anarcho-capitalists, voluntaries, Austrian economics, Chicago School of Economics, Scottish moral philosophy, that are coming within these ideas. I think, and I would recommend for anyone that would like to get involved or would like to get better ideas, to listen from the podcast of Anarchast. This one that you can see in here, Anarchapulco, from Jeff Berwick, Canadian, is living in Acapulco, and he has among the most developed ideas on how blockchain is and will continue to be used for political purpose. So it's used by the blockchain. If I could make a very, blockchain, it's an imaginary magical notebook where everything that you would write, it would be replicated eternally forever. And it's almost impossible to crack or to change it. Blockchain is the main application of fintech. So these are financial technologies. 50% of it has to do with blockchain. 50% of it has to do with cryptocurrencies. 83%, about more than half of it has to do specifically with Bitcoin. What are the main, if you want to call it this way, software or applications? It goes within blockchain, and the other part of it that is not cryptocurrencies, it is called Ethereum. Ethereum, then it has three divisions, which most important one, it's DAO, decentralized autonomous organizations. You can create smart contracts, and you can create political activities or political organizations, like the ones that we are mentioning in here. Not exactly, not that case, those are intentionated communities, but the biggest and probably the most popular one, where all of this information is being processed, is BitNation. So the technology itself, more than blockchain, we're starting to learn about Ethereum. Ethereum is the name of the specific kind of software. And if anyone would try to understand or to adapt, the real changes are happening within Ethereum, a little bit less within blockchain. I think another thing to point out is, should anyone be worried? Should the government be worried? Should the state bureaucrats, or should democracy or any ethnic minority should be worried specifically about it? And what is the role of negative organizations or criminal organizations of terrorism? At the moment, what it would be affecting the most, it is the private banks because of the cryptocurrencies. In the second level, it would be, the private banks because of fintech. Fintechs are the startups that exist in Google. Simple as that. The second one would be private banks. Private banks because of central banks because of cryptocurrencies. And whenever people understand and have a better vision on how can they use Bitcoin or any alternative form of method that is called alternative finance, regardless of the central bank and of the distribution and printing of unlimited resources or of money, that would have a direct impact. And the third one is the central government or the states, the bureaucrats. There is an organization called Bitcoin, founded in September 2014, Susan Tverkovsky, based in Brazil. She provides all social and government services, exactly as you would get it in any organizations that comes from land registering to a private will, to birth and death registration acts, childcare. They even have a space programs to send things to the sky. They have private security and all of the government services that they provide, except the military. They haven't been involved in the military. But the three core essence of the state, which is the legitimate use of violence, and which is the courts and the judges, the military and the police, two of them have already been addressed, and they already have direct solutions to solve these problems within BitNation, and BitNation paired with Liberland, and Liberland will eventually pair with this group of people in there, and that is whenever we're waiting for that momentum to happen. Why hasn't it been implemented in the UK? Because people are happy within the establishment. They don't see a terror regime or a direct need to implement social change as you would need in Honduras, as you would need in Mexico, as you do need in many other lack of democracy or ethnical groups like the African Americans within the Black Lives Matter. We have a project relating to massive incarceration, and we do not expect, as a consultancy, that significant changes would evolve or would happen within the United Kingdom or any functional democracy as the Nordic countries or Japan or Germany. So the blockchain is a technology for here to stay. Within the three different aspects of internet, of information, which is the W's, triple W, the Internet of Things, which is a smartphone, and the Internet of Value, that's another way of referring to blockchain. We believe that it would be maintaining, and we believe that if you understand that at least within humanitarian blockchain, we address the question of hierarchy, which is a system of injustice or oppression, white supremacy, Islamophobia, sexism. Those are intangible forms of oppression that no government or no organization, no individual or democracy can actually address themselves. We think that would be the last part of how can we actually bring Black and white people, how can we stop the massive incarceration of African Americans, how do we stop the gun violence and, of blacks in the US, and how do we integrate, as Josephine Gube mentioned before, the immigrants, the Arabs, the Eastern Europeans, that we value, that we need them, that we approve them. Not that we approve them, that we need them. We need more immigration. We are totally an open border organization. How do we change the stereotypes of those people? That is the single and most important question that blockchain cannot solve or cannot change at this moment. We're investigating. I think that the biggest failure that has existed is the incapacity for it to grow more organically, and that is largely due to government intervention, censorship, and ignorance. We just had a panel with Syed Kamal, which is a member of the European Parliament, and the leader within the UK about blockchain ideas. Himself, he addressed that he doesn't know most or any of the cases that we previously expressed. And for that, I will try to close with three ideas or three methods that are being created that if there would be any UK, United States government regulations, how are the community protecting themselves? They're using the Byzantine general protocol, meaning if you would have the Turkish army running against your door and all the international agency of security would try to eliminate blockchain or Bitcoin, how quickly can it regenerate? How quickly can it protect itself or be resilient against the Mossad of Israel, the FBI and the CIA, and the English and the KGB from Russia, security services trying to attack them? The other idea that is coming up a lot, it's the Hydra model. Whenever they try to close up one specific website or software, hundreds of them appear on the black market, on the underground market. So as long as there's still a preeminence and a market for illegal activities, there would be new technological ways where people would try, whenever you cut the head of one organization, dozens of them, they go away and would evolve. The other one, it's the idea that everything is decentralized. Everything, there's not the idea of resilience and holacracy. And that idea resembles or tries to explain that whenever there would be an incarceration or trying to, any government to stop those ideas from evolving, they would rejuvenate. There is totally decentralized. And the websites and the ideas, the DAOs, the centralized autonomous organizations, they act upon that principle, on the idea, my organization of itself. Next year, once it's totally organized, when it's totally has clients, it goes along, I'm going to step out for the next year. I'm not going to be the CEO or the president, director. I'm not going to have absolutely any involvement. And we would have periods that it would change every 3 months until there is not one single leader, director, or organizer of these projects.